So welcome also to our online delegates. So I'm sorry that you didn't hear anything in the beginning, but we only got to the agenda and we'll give a brief introduction to COPE and all its resources and COPE membership. We'll not go into details, as Matt just said. And then we will have case discussions and there will be breakout groups for the online delegates as well. And we'll gather again for questions and answers in the end. A little bit of housekeeping. So all attendees will be muted. It says here that cameras will be switched off. That's not true. So you have your cameras on. The meeting will be recorded, but only the plenary sessions. So not the breakout groups will not be recorded. And you're very welcome to ask questions. For online delegates, just post them in the Q&A box. Please don't use the chat, so we have everything in one place. And you can upvote questions by clicking on the thumbs up icon. And the captions are enabled, so you should be able to turn on captions in a range of languages by clicking on the closed caption button in your Zoom toolbar. Okay. So now to COPE. So COPE is Committee on Publication Ethics. It's a non-profit organization and it was established in 1997. It's registered as a charity and is run by a small group of paid employees with volunteers and trustee board and council. And from the first informal meeting in 1997, COPE has grown to above 14,000 members from almost 100 countries. And members are primarily editors of scholarly journals, they're publishers, but also universities and research institutes and associated individuals and companies. And it's important to note that COPE has no legal powers. So our purpose is to educate and advance knowledge and methods of safeguarding the integrity of the scholarly record. Our mission being to provide expert guidance to uphold the integrity through bringing together stakeholders, providing support and education, and also providing leadership and an unbiased expert voice. COPE resources are central to our work, so I'll guide you through or introduce you to a selection of them here. So we hold regularly online COPE forums for members. And in the forums, we discuss current or emerging topics. And we also discuss anonymized cases that members bring to the forum. And cases are thereafter published on the COPE website, along with the advice given. And we will have a closer look at two of those cases in the breakout sessions.
Yeah, and just all of the cases brought to the forums, and some of them were also brought directly to council to discuss as well between the forums. Those forums are open to all of the members of COPE, and the discussion there is the case is anonymised. I may be stepping on your toes there.
No, that's fine.
So everything's anonymised, so people don't know the exact details of who's involved and which journal, but everybody can then feed back to the case presenter. Yeah.
Yes, thanks. And then we have the flowcharts and infographics providing a step-by-step process to follow when you need guidance dealing with a specific ethical issue, for example, plagiarism or authorship disputes. And we have the guidelines, which are formal COPE policy, while discussion documents introduces issues and encourage discussion, and they are often about complex issues. And we organize webinars and COPE seminars for members around the world. And we have our e-learning program, which gives practical guidance on different topics, including plagiarism, authorship, and reviewer misconduct, among others. And the journal audit is for members to identify areas of their policy and procedures that may need to be revised. And last but not least, we are the joint founder of the Principles of Transparency and Best Practice in Scholarly Publishing, which Matt will talk more about soon. But first, just a quick look at the ethics toolkit for a successful editorial office. So this is a guide that helps journal editors and publishers to prepare their application for COPE membership. And it will aid editorial offices to develop or revise their policies and processes. And it's organized by 4 key activities. So the first 2 is about developing guidelines for authors and reviewers, the more educational ones. And the third one is maybe more proactive. So it's to help identify ethical concerns, develop processes to identify ethical concerns. And the fourth one is to develop guidelines for responding to suspected ethical breaches. And you can also note that the toolkit is not a guideline, it's like a meta guideline. So it's not meant to be used as a rule book, but rather to create your own guidelines for your journal and your discipline. Okay.
Yeah.
So to you, Matt.
So the principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing, they were first launched in 2013. So the current version is the 4th version, so there's been lots of revisions, and that is now nearly 3 years old. And the organizations that make up the group that have formed these principles are COPE, WAMI, the World Association of Medical Editors, DOAJ, the Director of Open Access Journals, which I now work for, and OASPA, the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. And we're actually in the process of just starting, I think it's next week, a discussion about creating a new revision of those guidelines. So if you have any comments about those principles, then now is the time to suggest feedback. So the principles fall into 16 different areas. I won't go through them all, but it spans from things about the journal and publisher websites through to transparency about business operations, making sure that there's transparency about various types of publication ethics, and then it goes into details of marketing and advertising. So there's a pretty comprehensive look at the different areas that you want to be covered. The principles are quite high level, and it's a balance between giving people a general overview, and then also because they apply across different roles. So for the publisher, the journal, and the editor. So they're intended as a starting point, and then it's the guidelines of the different organizations that puts those principles into practice. And so in a lot of cases, then the fallback position will be on COPE guidance or the specific guidance of the different organizations. And one important thing is that they apply across all content types, and it also includes as well as those 16 areas in the guidelines, it also includes a general principle that you should be trying to be following principles of inclusion and equity, and you shouldn't be allowing kind of ideas of geopolitics or geographical variance to affect the decision-making or operations of the journals.
Oh, I was just going to switch off the chat. Maybe.
Okay, so on housekeeping there, yeah, so we don't have a Q&A, so just use the chat instead of that. Okay, there we go. So we did have yeah, so it goes through the journal content, journal practices, organization, and business practices. So those are the 4 areas that those 16 areas are broken into. One of the things that I found at both COPE and DOAJ is certainly copyright and licensing is areas that journals definitely fall down at, either not applying them properly, so that they may be claiming to be open access but not have an open license, or there may be inconsistencies in different places of the website or between the website and the articles. So it's making sure those things are all aligned is really important. There's also often issues with journal ownership and management, so confusion around who owns journals or lack of transparency, and maybe editorial members who are not expert or haven't agreed to be on boards that they're listed for. And also where you can't work out who is the editor because you haven't given sufficient information to identify them. So do you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
Or do I? Yeah, okay. So one document that's really useful, it's the short guide for ethical editing for new editors. It's really useful not just for new editors. I actually do consult this occasionally myself because I think it's a really good overview of the basic principles for being an editor. So some of it, which it goes into, are about how you work to be taking over from a previous editor, working with the publisher, revising policies, but it can also be really useful for people who are just on an editorial board and want to understand the basics for working as that. So it's basically, it's focused on somebody who's taking over as a kind of senior editor or editor-in-chief, but it can be useful, really useful for other people as well. And it lays out, you can see in the small print in point 10, it lays out especially issues around editorial independence, of making sure that you've got that you're satisfied that you're able to make the decisions that you want to within the framework of the journal. So editorial independence can be really difficult to work out in practice, but you want to make sure there isn't undue interference in the operation of the working of being an editor. And those issues are becoming really acute actually in many settings. So making sure there's clear lines between publishers and the societies and other oversight bodies and the editor, working out what the different responsibilities are is really important. And so, yeah, and it links to all sorts of information in the flowcharts, etc. So the code guidance really started with the flowcharts and has expanded out from them. So one of the kind of core outputs is still the flowcharts. So those are something that to often refer to. So I think that's probably enough on that area. So yeah, mentioning the flowcharts then, this is something that over time COPE has realized that sometimes there might have been gaps in things that were quite central. And one of the obvious things is how you generally approach publication ethics concerns. And so this is a very general guide to how to, for when something comes to light that might be concerning, either something that's been recognized internally and you're taking action, or that you've had somebody contact you, or you've maybe seen on social media, or even something that has arisen in the press. This is a general approach to deal with publication ethics issues and understand how to resolve them in an effective manner, and making sure that you're following the right processes. So I won't attempt to go through all of the steps on that, and one of the things to think about with the flowcharts as well, this is a general guide. So if there are parts that you don't think are applicable, or you've got good reason for going off that process, then that's fine. But you should be aware that people may, challenge what the process is. But it can actually protect you as an editor, and it can protect publishers if you do follow the process that's written down in COPE guidance, because it then means that you've got a defensible process. And if you can also have your own standard operating procedures that reflect the COPE processes, then that can protect you as well against even legal challenges. So these COPE topics are the general, what's the term? It's the core practices. Core practices. That's the.
You used to call it core practices.
That's right. It's called COPE topics now.
Topics.
Yeah. So these are the central areas that you should be thinking about. Anyone should be thinking about publication ethics. There will be specifics that are not included within this, or might be under a subheading of part of this, but these are the broad areas. Author and contributorship in most areas faced by journals and institutions is the most common area of publication ethics. So this is the area to be really focused on, because it will be the bulk of any issues that arise to do with publication ethics. It's a shame that it's so common, because the principles are really not that hard to follow in practice, but the complication is, of course, that in academia, then authorship is the currency that people use. So you get rewarded for your contributorship towards publications, and therefore there are pressures for people to be listed as an author, when by academic or publishing criteria, then they shouldn't be listed as an author. So yeah, those basic criteria that somebody should have intellectually contributed, that can sometimes fall by the side, and so that you get lots of disputes. And it can also be when you get disputes among academics and researchers, then it can be disputes about authorship is the way that it reveals itself to the rest of the world. Conflicts of interest are another key area. It's often most seen in authors declaring their financial interest, but it's beyond that. Authors should also declare non-financial conflicts of interest, and also the word potential is really useful. So it's not about, or perceived, it's not about whether the person agrees that they have a conflict that is affecting them. It's about whether somebody might reasonably perceive that there is a conflict that needs declaring. It's kind of rule of thumb that if something would be embarrassing if it was raised afterwards, you should just be transparent up front. And this can also apply to reviewers. Do they have a conflict with the authors or with the topic, and the editors as well? So it's got many different areas, and the basics are that you should be as transparent as possible, and that you should consider whether you need to be removed from it. So that there might be situations where it's inappropriate that somebody should be a reviewer or an editor. Data is there's less consensus on this. The basics are that you need to be making the data available on request to the editor and the reviewers, but there's lots of variation about this. People are pushing for open data. So this is something there isn't complete consensus about, but this will often come up with disputes about whether there's errors or not. Diversity, that's becoming a political hot topic, but it's still viewed as really important by COPE and the other people behind the principles of transparency. So making sure that there aren't biases within the process and people are being treated fairly through the system. Journal management is a really core area to make sure that the processes are being followed well and that there aren't conflicts in the running of the journal. So often you might get conflicts between the way that the journal is owned and managed and the way that the editorial process goes. So making sure there's clear lines of division between those two is really important. For instance, you should have editorial separated from marketing and that kind of thing. Peer review is really obvious. As to have really well run. And one of the things that's interesting about people talking about the ethics of peer review is it's often type of peer review that they're used to or have been first exposed to is what they think is ethical. So certain people will say you need to have double anonymized peer review, otherwise it's not ethical. And other people say, no, you need it all to be open and transparent, otherwise it's not ethical. Most of these approaches are ethical, just as long as you're running them well and then people have awareness of what it is and people have agreed to things. So you can have variations, but it needs to be consistent, to be clear what the process is, and that you need to be sticking to what the process is. So if you've promised people confidentiality, then you should stick to confidentiality. If you said that people won't be named, then they shouldn't be named. If you said people will be named or the reports will be public, then those things should be followed through. So it's making sure you've got consistency. Plagiarism is a really big one, which people often fall down for getting confused about the difference between text similarity spotting and plagiarism. Just because you've got a high score on Authenticate or whatever tool you use, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's plagiarism. So it's making sure that the people using tools understand what the principle is and how to assess plagiarism. Yeah, it's not, plagiarism is not just a number, and that's getting very difficult with AI tools, which can obscure plagiarism because they can take from other sources but use different wording very effectively. Post-publication review is all about making sure that there is an avenue for people to feedback when there is certainly errors and also differences of opinion within the field. So journals should ideally have letters to the editors or a commenting system, or failing that, every journal with a DOI, anybody who wants to can go on PubPeer and leave comments, and hopefully journals will be responsive to those. And then just move this, we can see, yeah. And publication practices is about making sure that you run so that you've got the, I'm trying to think what it is actually. Yeah, I think this is basically about making sure that you've got the journal running well, but I think I have to check that one in detail. Research ethics is one that is actually really important for editors, but it's quite difficult because you've got variation in geographical setting. So the basic principles are that you need to make sure that you have, if you're doing human research, that you have consent and ethics approval, but it can really vary depending on the type of research and the geographical setting. So as an editor, you have to be aware that the minimum people have to meet is what their legal system is and their institutional setting. But as editors, you can decide that you want ethical standards that go above what those are. So you can clearly set out your own ethical standards to be higher than maybe the local setting. So that, and this is an issue with animal research as well, to make sure that you've got the proper oversight of ethics boards. In some settings, they don't have animal ethics boards, but as editors of some animal research journals decide that they actually want it as a requirement, and they will have to go through the process of setting up those boards if they want to publish in those journals. And it's the case that if editors want to, then they can require documentation of this. So it's something that people, as a minimum, should have a statement declaring what the ethics process was, whether there was approval, whether there was a waiver, what the body was, and the dates of approval. But you can also require documentation if you want, either routinely or on request as well. But the basic is that you want to have all of these different areas covered by your policies as a minimum. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Go. Okay, so you might have seen that we recently launched our new website. If you hadn't had the chance to navigate through it, I would recommend that you do it, because it's supposed to be more user-friendly now than the past one.
Yeah,
right.
I think so.
Yeah. Now to COPE memberships. So we currently have 5 membership types. So journal members is for journals that has published for at least 1 year and published at least 20 original research articles. And if you have 5 or more journals that you want to apply for, you should apply for a publisher membership. Individual members are for those who can demonstrate their involvement in publication ethics, such as scholarly publication managers and librarians. And then we have the corporate members, which is for companies working in or associated with publication of peer-reviewed scholarly journals, such as companies providing editorial services and indexing platforms. And also we quite recently, I think it was in 23,
yeah, there was a trial for a few years beforehand, and
yeah.
We've opened up the institutional membership.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important part, because often it was seen that COPE was a kind of publishers club. And institutional members coming on board really helps make sure that we have the community and different stakeholders talking with each other and not competing with each other or accusing each other. So it's really constructive, actually. Yeah, because COPE was originally a membership organisation of medical journal editors that came together. And so it's expanded from that. And so the aim is to be inclusive and to make sure that all of the different parts can talk together.
Would like to, bring all the stakeholders together to discuss ethics. So I mentioned most of these member benefits earlier, but I'd like to add that as a member, you get access to template letters, which will help you to write letters to authors or reviewers if you suspect misconduct, which is probably the most difficult thing we do as editors, I think. And you can also stand for election as council member, and you'll get your personal COPE logo. Okay, so I think we've talked enough, Matt, and we'll move on to the cases and the breakout groups.
I just wanted to highlight there on the previous slide. The COPE journal audit is something which I think you mentioned before.
Yeah, I mentioned
this is something that is a member benefit, and actually is really useful because it goes through step by step. It's making sure that you've got all of the aspects, all of the things worked out to make sure. And if you don't, then you can do that self-revision process to make sure you filled in the gaps.
Yeah, it's like a checklist.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's like a self-evaluation tool.
Yes.
Okay.
It is, yeah. So let's move on to the cases. So Matt will give you a short introductions to the two cases that we picked for this workshop. And after that, we'll break out into groups, but I think we'll do the practicalities after you have presented the cases.
Yeah, we will, and we have paper copies as well that we'll hand out after I've done the intro. So this was a real case that was brought to COPE, and so these are all available on the COPE website as a library of content. So these cases, it's a bit like case law, although it's not that these are necessarily binding, but you can find lots of the advice that was given by the COPE Forum or by COPE Council previously, and so you can use these as guidance on how to proceed yourself, so you can reflect on the guidance that was given by the forum, but it's a supplement to the formal guidance. So the journal has received a review report that they suspect has been the reviewer suspects that the author has used AI in the writing of the article, so that it was they've written to the editor in confidence to say that they think that there was issues about the structure and inconsistencies that make them think that there was AI used in writing it. And so they uploaded the content to an AI checker, and it thinks that the tool thinks, tools don't think, but the tool reports that there's a likelihood of 75 to 82% that the text was generated by AI. So they also reported this in the comments to the author, including the fact that they used the content detector. So there's various questions. I mean, you might have more questions yourself, but you can reflect on these. Is it okay for reviewers to run manuscripts on AI checkers with the confidentiality requirement of peer review? Should they be mentioning in comments to the authors that they suspect fraud, including fraudulent use of AI? Can you edit reviews to remove that kind of comment? Should you trust the review? You haven't necessarily seen the use of the tool yourself. How do you approach this when there's no specific COPE flowchart or COPE policy on this. There's a discussion document.
Mhm.
And when you send the decision letter, do you take out the part that says that you suspect that it was written by AI? Yeah. Should I do the second case as well? Or?
Please.
Okay. Okay, so the second one got a very tiny heading there.
I don't know what happened.
So it's a eye test for anyone in the room if you can read that. Suspicious response to author change requests. So, like I said, authorship is one of the big areas, and so this is the kind of thing that so many editors will be coming across. So the journal receives multiple requests to change the author list after acceptance. So there were 5 co-authors, and then author A and the corresponding author and the co-first author wanted to remove one of the authors, wanted to add a new co-author, reorder the list of authors, and change the designated co-first authors. So many journals allow marking as first author and then joint first author. Some also allow marking more than one corresponding author as well. So the publisher said that you need the consent of all the co-authors, which is a standard practice at many journals. So the authors responded, but then the one who was supposed to be removed didn't, and they had to be chased. And then the response from that author who was going to be removed wasn't from the email addresses being used for them at the time of submission. The text matched what the requesting author had said, and was odd phrasing, and it wasn't signed. So they said that they needed the response from their institutional address, and then they never responded. And so the publisher didn't think that they had consent to remove that author. So the requesting author was insisting on it, but then said that it could be okay to go ahead with the current author list to avoid delays. It was published, and then the author contacted them again and said they still wanted at least the author to be added, and they said that they still needed the consent, and then they received an email saying it was okay for them to be removed as a co-author. Yet another email address was used, the spelling of their name changed, the spelling in the body of the third email didn't match the email addresses or the previous correspondence or the published article, and the publisher suspects that the corresponding author forged those responses. It's serious, but they don't have proof. So basically, given those concerns, what should the journal and publisher do? So we've got 30 minutes to do breakouts.
Yeah, I think so. So we're
Are we okay?
4:25 now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we'll do 25 minutes maybe.
Okay.
So we have time. I see there's a lot of questions, so that we have time for questions in the end.
So we have questions in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Great. Okay. So thanks everyone for doing the breakout sessions online and in person. So we'll go through the case of suspected AI use by an author. So one of the key questions was, should a reviewer be running that check? So I guess in the room we can take responses on that. What did people think from their groups? So we have Eva.
Yes, we were talking about it, and we agreed that it's a breach of confidentiality, because you cannot guarantee that some of the data will not be used by the AI software provider, AI tool provider, and in some cases it's if you're for example using it at our university, you can click that you will deposit the article to check it, or you can choose not to. But even if you choose not to deposit the article, there are still some data which they can then later can be used. So we think that this is a breach of confidentiality by the review. So. And if we say that we are providing confidentiality to authors in our instructions, that it's against the general policies.
Yeah.
But Xenia will tell you something.
Yeah.
Yes, and now. My name is Xenia, I'm from the Journal, European Science Editing. I had a slightly different opinion. First of all, I needed some more information. For example, if the manuscript was posted as a preprint, then we cannot talk about confidentiality.
Yeah.
And second of all, we don't know how the reviewer did use the LLM. You can use it anonymously, then you don't deposit content.
Yeah, so to pick up on what Xenia said there, then there is confidentiality expected of submitted manuscripts, but if the authors had already previously posted it as a preprint, then that means that they could upload the preprint version and they wouldn't have breached any confidentiality of that version. There's an issue with, I think, with what Eva was saying about it retaining information. Sometimes a tool might say it doesn't, but it could. So you don't know necessarily. So unless you trust that that tool definitely doesn't retain information, and there have been cases, I think, where tools that were not supposed to be retaining information did actually retain information. So it can be a concern. So do you trust who's running this AI detector tool? Yeah. So, and should the reviewer be mentioning that they suspect fraudulent use of AI? Does anyone have any thoughts on that one? To the authors, I mean. So are comments like this the kind of thing that reviewers should be bringing up in comments to the authors?
You again.
Let's have someone else.
We would.
Let's have someone else first before even focusing again. No.
We have someone.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think majority of our group agrees that this should be discussed rather with the editor. So the reviewer should first raise this issue with the editor and not put it in the comments to other section. For example, in our Journal for Technology and Biotechnology, we are using the online submission system, and you have confidential comments to editors in which you can write things like this, and have another section which is intended for authors. And I remember clearly that Liz Wager from COPE told me once that you should not redact the reviews before sending them to authors. So I stick to that. But if someone does it different.
Yeah, and COPE actually does now have specific guidance on when it's okay to edit or withhold reviews. So the general principle is where a review is grossly unhelpful or inflammatory, insulting, legally problematic. So those are the kind of situations in which it's okay. But you should be thinking about this before you get a review like that, rather than after you've got a review like that.
And then you'll often discuss with the reviewer to amend the review instead of just editing it, right?
Yeah.
So you can't edit the review.
Yeah, I mean, there may be cases where the editor has to make the decision that it needs to be edited. For instance, when I was an editor, there was a paleontologist swore at another paleontologist in their reviews. So it's just, I didn't need to ask them whether they could, I could remove the swear word. Do we have anyone online who wants to give a summary of any of those 2 points? Okay, so Nina, you can unmute yourself, I think. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. I'm unmuted.
Right.
Thank you very much for this nice opportunity. Actually, to my mind, I think that the publisher usually provides clear instructions to a reviewer what should be checked, and actually it's about relevancy, about clearance of research results, methodology, and so on. So the scope or the limits of using chat GPT or other tools of AI usually we, as I represent the journal, we are trying to check these moments before we direct this article or manuscript for reviewing process. So it's not the responsibility of a reviewer. So all the moments that have to be indicated in the review report should be considered or discussed previously between the reviewer and publisher and the publisher as well.
Yeah, thanks. Deborah, do you want to go ahead?
Sorry?
As a problem with that, so I mean, you might be doing the plagiarism check yourself, but if, for example, there's a language difference, it may be that a peer reviewer spots something that's plagiarism, and they spot it because it was in French and that's their native language, and they think, hold on, I've read something about this before, whereas your plagiarism checkers didn't find it because it was in French. So although you say what the reviewers are to do, they're not, you know, if they spot something that they think is clear plagiarism, then it would be ethically wrong, I think, for them not to tell you that they thought that there was plagiarism, even though that wasn't within the remit that they were given as a peer reviewer.
Yeah, and I can briefly speak to that before I go back to Nina. I think it's a valid point that reviewers shouldn't be taking it on themselves to routinely be running manuscripts through whatever automated systems they have at hand. So they shouldn't routinely be doing AI tool checking. They shouldn't routinely be uploading. There's certainly been problems with use of tools with plagiarism. I find plagiarism checks is a really useful analogy to AI, because people are bad at doing plagiarism checks. So imagine how bad they are at doing AI checking. And the issue with plagiarism checking before is that people have used Turnitin, which is designed for student essays. The problem is it retains the article, unlike Authenticate, and so then it means that when they submit to another journal, then it gets flagged up as plagiarism when they submit to a later journal, if they get rejected by the one who used Turnitin or a reviewer who used Turnitin. So it's mistaken use of tools can cause big problems, and reviewers deciding on their own to do automated checks can cause problems. So yeah, I think the principle there is keeping reviewers towards the task, but then if they do have suspicions, raising it to the editor is a good idea. I think the question here is about the questionable action was running it on the content checker themselves instead of just flagging their concerns to the editor directly. So that might be where they've overstepped the mark. Nina, did you want to comment again?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add that actually all publishers have their own authorized system for checking for plagiarism and AI as well. So there is a risk that the article will end up in some databases that will register in a publisher as published. And upon rechecking, the system will show 100% of plagiarism, as you said, of course. So I confirm this information. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the general principle about using tools is knowing why you're using a tool, whether it's the correct tool for the job, and who should be using it. And then the question is, can we trust this review? Can we trust what they're telling us? And what do we do about it when there's no established COPE flow chart or COPE policy on things? As I think I said in the description, there is actually a discussion document about AI tools, but the discussion documents they're preliminary and they're bringing together ideas rather than saying this is what COPE thinks people should do. Have we got someone in the room who wants to comment? Not Eva.
Except Eva.
Not.
Right.
It's okay, Eva. I'm like you when I'm in the audience.
So maybe you have someone online. Yes.
Okay. Anybody? Oh,
Yeah, that's fine.
yep, yep, go ahead.
Perhaps, Ksenia,
Wait for the
can I
microphone.
Say a few words from our group as well, about
Yeah.
if it's reliable. So we decided some, not,
That's it on?
the question of, review.
Need to bring it closer.
Yeah, okay, right.
From here.
Yeah. So, there is no, code flow chart, so we have to check as well these recommendations and other recommendations as well. It's absolutely, mandatory to know your recommendations, but other, organization will be also helpful. But in general, we have to investigate this case, and, to decide how to tackle this problem in the journal, and so that was our recommendation from our group.
Yeah, sure.
To get it again.
Yeah, Eva can speak.
Go ahead, Eva.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to add that actually, if other parts of the review are valid, are raising valid points, for me, it is still something, a review that I can trust, of course. But yes, I agree with Irina, you need to check everything. But I don't think that we can, say that this is not a valid review if other points are valid. And only this part is problematic, so.
Yeah, so you don't throw the whole review out because just one aspect might be questionable. Yeah, the English idiom for that is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
There's also a suggestion in the chat here, the journal's editorial office could run such checks in the future before sending to peer review.
Yes, so publishers may decide that they do trust a tool because they validated it and they believe it's effective. So, and some publishers have used the AI detector tool that is run by Authenticate as part of the plagiarism checking. So they also have the option to run manuscripts through. So I guess one of the issues as to whether to trust the review is, do you trust that tool? So we don't know if they know which tool it is. One of the difficulties with AI checking, there's three main difficulties that I know of. One of them is that the way that they use the checking is through an idea called burstiness. So it's the length of sentences. So are they short or are they long? So most fluent English speakers will have a mix of short sentences and then very long sentences. And so the AI tools, the large language models, will tend to have quite fixed lengths. The problem is, who else also has fixed lengths of sentences or not very variable lengths? Well, often people who are not very fluent in English language, and maybe people who are dyslexic. So then they're used to trying to write in quite formulaic ways because they remember phrases and it avoids them tripping up. And so if you use that as a measure, then you start to catch people who just write like that. So they're not actually a robot. Another one is the idea of perplexity, which is you use a very variable vocabulary. Again, tools may use quite standard ways of writing, but who else does this? Well, people who are learning English. So people who are not fluent in a native speaker may also use a limited vocabulary. And again, people with from certain backgrounds or certain neurological conditions or psychology, they might also write in a particular way, or if they've just been taught to write that way. So again, perplexity may catch certain people. And as well, there's these, the tools use particular phrases, particular words like meticulous and delve and innovative. So they use these kind of buzzwords But the reason that they do that is because the people who trained the tool were often Nigerians who are using Nigerian business language, which uses that kind of phrasing. So you will catch people who have that kind of business language. Also, younger people are now reading AI writing and they're picking up the way it writes. And so they're now using delve in every essay. And so if you use these words to say this is AI, then you also catch real people. So this is the real problem with AI, is it gives you a score, a potential, is this AI, but you don't know for sure until unless you can actually prove it, which is incredibly difficult. So just the basic principle. So we have a comment online. Sorry, Isaac, you can go ahead if you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. My question is about like AI and the review. Does it also touch or cut across all areas? For example, when somebody is when someone is conducting a study, like a primary study, like he's basically the one out to maybe to do a research and work on some some issues, some way of living, like he's collecting data fast and so sorry, I got some cold. I'm sorry for that. So if somebody now like about that kind of a data, does the AI also is it also applicable, or is it perhaps restricted or limited to some studies? Primary study, one is giving out first-hand ideas, like he's the one already who's done that, and he's already got the conclusions, and it's first-hand information. On what basis would perhaps AI now be used to evaluate that? And again, sorry for the flu.
No, that's absolutely fine. So this actually feeds into a question that Michael wrote in the chat: is the use of AI ethically off limits? So the assumption that the reviewer has been making is that the use of AI is definitely something that is a problem that they need to flag up to the editor and they think is unethical. And so many authors use AI to do a literature review and for helping them to write articles. So where is the ethical boundary on writing, either in review articles or in primary research articles? So that's the kind of question that Michael has raised and Isaac has raised. Does anyone have thoughts about where it is that you, where are the limits on use of large language models or other tools in writing articles?
Anyone in the room or online?
No,
No,
I would prefer someone like my young colleagues. Bogdana.
Anyway,
Bogdana.
Anyone online want to talk to that? Everyone's shy suddenly. So one of the things will be about whether the journal publisher has a policy about
Yes,
this.
I wanted to say that, but
And so
didn't.
one of the principles is about declaration. And so this is often where the issue can come in, is if the journal has said you need to declare use of tools, and then you can see that there has been use of tools, then that can be a problem. Even so, if they had declared it up front and they said how they used it and in what sections, that may have been okay. If they haven't declared it, then that could be seen as a breach of the policy. So if a journal has that clear policy up front, then it means it can enforce it. Whereas if it doesn't have that policy in place, it's more difficult to know how to handle the situation, because you've then got to decide, has the use of the tool affected the veracity, the validity of what's being written? And so that will play to what Isaac was talking about, is can you use AI effectively when you're doing a primary research article? I mean, from my perspective, yes, you can, but you've got to make really sure that it's accurately reflecting what you want to say. So you can, for instance, use bullet points and say, please turn this into prose, but you've got to check that that writing it produces accurately reflect what your study is about, how you did things, and what the results are. So it's always making sure. So it would be the same as if a person was doing it. You can have an author editor who helps you develop an article, but you have to make sure that they are not twisting your words in the process. So it's the same with the tool. Is it accurate? And that's the real fundamental.
Yeah, I guess so. So the key things here to, I mean, it's transparency. So you have to declare what you've done, and also, like Matt says, check what I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, and Deborah says that there's stigma around the use of AI. Absolutely, there is. And so I think the question is, so sometimes people say, well, why we're not declaring that we used spell check or that we used Microsoft Word or something. And I think that's a little glib, because it's the use of the tools that's often being shown to make things up. So references can be made up, facts can be made up, things can be summarized in the wrong way. And so that's why people have to be particularly careful. So I think it's not just that there's undue concern about it. I think the concern is very valid. And so it's making sure that the use of the tools is correct and accurate and is helpful.
Daniel has a hand
Yeah, do we have it?
online.
Oh yeah, Daria, do you want to? Yeah, Daria, do you want to speak? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I want to speak about AI, that is ChatGPT. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think this is a method. For example, I am in art. We can use a lot of material, for example, or my specific field. We can use collage and technology. This is a method to use the GPT, but this is problem. What is the problem? That is, the author has got a problem, and he or she wants to research and use some technology, but the constraints or recycles or tools, it is true or not true. This is important. But use GP8 or AI tools isn't hurt me. A people, a science, a man, a woman can use. This is not problem. But if the author belong to all things or problem by GPT, yes, this is a problem. What is the method? For example, we have got a lot of art, for example, cinema or theater. Not date. The technology is become, the method is become. Can I understand? Can I?
Yeah, so you can use
Okay.
it as a kind of research tool and a method itself. Yeah. And that's okay if you're doing it within the framework of your field. Yeah. So I think, yeah, so we had, I'll just round up to see if there's anything that we had missing from that. So yeah, they should refer to their policy. For authors, some do allow it, but transparency is essential, which I said. So they could present the issue to, if they decide that AI was used and it wasn't declared, then they should, follow up in that way. So that's, so yeah, there is AI checkers that do or don't store data, so that can be a problem. So confidentiality is a problem. So yeah, there's the guidelines on editing peer reviews, and they should ask the reviewer to change it or send the whole report, but add a note and contextualize it. So yeah, that was pretty much what we were capturing. So I think we
have a question.
Yeah, go on.
Summarize the issue on publication ethics and editorial policy for journal. In Ukraine, we are right now doing on like mandatory level for all the journals to announce their policy on AI tools. So,
Yeah.
to what extent we should announce everything? So, we are checking manuscripts, how we are checking what tools we are using, what methods, concerning authors' behavior, they can use it, they have to declare it, to what extent, what type of this language, large language models, what version.
Yeah.
So, concerning reviewers, concerning handling, managing editors, and perhaps something like reliable sources or for checking. And the very end, in case of detection on post-publication period, how we can, what procedures we can offer, what steps. So, very useful tool, AI recommendation from EASE. It's very useful, actually, recommendations, and we are looking forward to get your recommendation, but just briefly summarize what should we mention for our journals.
So at DOAJ, then next month we should be having guidelines on the basics of what should be in a policy. And this is certainly something that we'll be discussing in the revision of the principles of transparency and best practice. So I think for the time being, I would fall back on the guidance such as that EASE has produced. And so
Also, WAMI has nice.
yeah, WAMI has a statement on it exactly as well. So I think it would be falling back on those kind of established statements. I think it's also in the Council of Science Editors. I think they've updated their guidelines as well. So I think we're running short of time now. So
we have like
12
minutes left.
Yeah. So on the authorship changes, so yeah, this is the kind of, you know, if you're on a publication ethics team, a research integrity team, this is the kind of thing you deal with all the time. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It is my personal answers.
Yeah.
My name is Jun from South Korea. I enjoyed the workshop. I have questions and I think I try to wrap it up. First, I think the authorship change could not be done after acceptance. That's my idea. So only change of authorship can be done during the revision, but during the revision, you have to get consent from all the authors. So for this part, it's already been published. So no change should be done. I mean, I don't have the proof, but in my idea, someone has submitted journal A and it was rejected. And then there was fight between the authors, and then not much content has been changed, but in another journal, authorship has been changed. That's what I heard. I do not have proof. So in this case, maybe corresponding also was not satisfied with author D. So maybe forced the first author to change it or remove D or add another friend of E. So I think maybe there might be issues. So if you want to change the authorship, you should recommend the author that it's not allowed at this moment. If there is tremendous amount of reason that it should be changed, then you have to go to the procedure of like writing erratum or like corrigendum regarding whose fault that might be. So that's my idea. So I want to get answers after the discussion, and I just want to say that.
Yeah, so there are journals and publishers that don't allow late changes. Sometimes even after the first revision, they don't allow changes. Sometimes at point of acceptance that they don't allow changes after that. And some of the rationale for this, the reason for this is, as you were suggesting, then you should have dealt with authorship disputes well ahead of the point of acceptance of the article. The other issue is, I might be spoiling what someone else is going to say, is paper mills, which are selling authorship slots. And so one of the ways that journals are fighting back against this is not allowing late changes to prevent the ability of paper mills to sell slots of authorship, particularly first authorship, corresponding author. Those are the prime spots. So some journals just say, if you weren't an author on the original version, you're not allowed to be a corresponding author or first author, for example. So these are ways to take out the validity of the kind of the currency of those positions, just saying we don't allow this anymore. And that can help push back against paper mills. Yeah. Any more thoughts in the floor, or should we, anyone online want to comment?
Lunchtime for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eva, go ahead.
Well, yes, in our journal, there is a policy that you cannot change the or even the order of authors after acceptance. So you can do it during revision, but you need to have a valid reason for that. For example, if additional experiments are needed or something similar, then you can add an additional author with the consent of all authors. But sometimes we get like a request to remove some authors, which is for me more, challenging. And we also ask for approval of all authors, including the removed ones, and then we receive it. So I'm not sure what to think about it. Addition of authors is for me lesser problem than removal of authors. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, and I think personally, I think if somebody's removed, then they really should at least be included in the acknowledgements because people sometimes forget that it's not, it's not just authorship or you were nowhere. There's the acknowledgements as well. And that is, if somebody was central enough to be an author on the original submission, they should have done something that deserves at least an acknowledgement. There may be cases where there's very good reasons that somebody shouldn't be. So there may be legal issues and personal safety that somebody can say, no, I really need to not be on this paper, but that's going to be extremely rare. And I would say, yeah, have a clear policy on this and stick to it. And I think, as a lot of people were saying, often editors are not best placed to try to solve authorship disputes. We don't know if this is a genuine authorship dispute. We don't know if it was to do with paper mills. We don't know if there was something else going on behind the scenes. But often what you say is, go to the institution, we'll report it to them, you need to sort it out, and then come back to us with the official solution, or official resolution of an investigation. And if it has happened after publication, we were mentioning how there is a pending guidance on expressions of concern that's coming out. There's also an update on the retraction guidelines that are coming out, and that will help guide on this, because there is a part that talks about when it might be appropriate to use an expression of concern in cases where you have this sort of authorship dispute. So it's not just a straightforward authorship situation. It's something where you're suspecting that there's misconduct going on because they may have fabricated email addresses and that kind of thing. And so that escalates this from just being an authorship dispute to a situation where you think somebody's actually trying to defraud the journal, which turns it into misconduct rather than just a dispute. So it's working out where that dividing line is between something which is just a normal everyday authorship dispute, which we have happen all the time, but to something which is more complicated. And I think we can just flick through to see what the advice was from, that's the other one. Yeah, and so they suggested trying to phone the author, which is a creative solution. I've done similar things where I contacted somebody who I knew, for example, was the dean of their department by an address that I could verify, and so contacted them and said, "Is this person? Does this person use this email address? And can you confirm that they are happy to be an author on this on this paper?" So there's ways that you can think creatively to solve the problem. When I was an editor and I couldn't even get a reviewer to respond, I even put the hard copy into their pigeonhole because they were in London, and then they gave the response. So you can sometimes think of, creative ways to get into contact with people, but you have to know that it's verified, that you know that you're contacting the right person, either by proxy or directly.
So stalking on Facebook is not a good.
Stalking on Facebook. See, I've tried contacting people on Facebook. It tends not to work. LinkedIn is better. LinkedIn's better because it's a professional setting. You can ORCID, as I was saying to one of the groups, can be useful. The Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. ORCID can be helpful because they may have updated what institution they're now at. And so you can use that to go and find what institution they're at. That's particularly helpful when they've got a surname which is very a name which is very common. So that can be a useful tool. But ORCID is not always verified by the institution, but it can be useful still. So yeah, and they suggest that an expression of concern could be published and there could be an institution investigation. So yeah, and they say validate authors using ORCID or some other form of validation. So there's ways that you can do this, but yeah, this is not a straightforward authorship dispute. So yeah, and I think we
have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
So we might do a couple of the questions in the chat.
Oh yeah.
So there was a question about plagiarism and percentage of.
Yeah, so there was a question about what percentage is appropriate for threshold for plagiarism. So I'd say, as I kind of hinted at earlier, plagiarism is not a number. Plagiarism is taking somebody else's words or ideas or work without acknowledgement or approval. And so it's the fact that you've taken something else from another source and you're using it without proper acknowledgement and without permission. And that's what plagiarism is. So it could even be, you know, a single sentence could potentially be plagiarism. So it's not about the amount. And if you're taking a particularly poor idea from someone else and passing it off as your own, even if though it's a tiny percentage of the article, if it's a key part of it, it could be enough to retract an article. Particularly if you're taking results and passing them off as your own, then that's immediately retractable and definitely reporting to the institution for a formal investigation. So the idea is to get away from thinking about plagiarism as, you know, 15, 20% of the article. You can use these things as a rule of thumb, but it's not as to where to investigate, but you can't just say, oh, Authenticate tells me this has got plagiarism, I'm going to reject. You've got to look at what the source is, because if you don't, then you might miss the fact that it was a huge match, but actually it was the author's own thesis or preprint, and you're going to look foolish when you go and reject that, and then they say, you know, right all over social media what a fool the editor is. So
You have a hand online, Deborah.
yeah, Deborah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that yeah, I mean, the guidance I've seen is that, you know, if it's the methods, I mean, there's a limited number of ways you can write some things. And even some things like pathological description, you know, you can hepatomegaly and splenomegaly, hepatosplenomegaly, enlargement of the spleen. You know, once you've gone for those three, you've about exhausted the possible ways of saying it. So but things like actual results is very different from, you know, methods seeming very similar because you're using the same methods. And that, as I say, you know, or I had someone querying recently, they said that the table of the monitoring that was done in the anesthesia was very similar to the table of monitoring that they'd done, and this surely meant that it had to be plagiarism. Well, no, it's a standard way of doing it. You would always tend to be monitoring the same things and at the same sort of interval, so the table is going to look the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that there is general acceptance, including in the COPE guidance for text recycling, for example, which is where that's the kind of term of art for what many people call self-plagiarism. So where the authors are reproducing their own wording. So often it's considered that the methods are essentially, so unless you're trying to pass off some methods as your own invention, as long as you're saying this comes from them, then there's much more leeway for kind of reuse of wording within limits for that. Yeah. Did anybody else have anything that burning questions that they wanted?
There was a question about how you become a member of HOPE.
Oh yeah, how do you become a member? So it is described on the website, but essentially you can just apply through on a form on the website. We had a question about it from the audience actually about how you go about this. Yeah, but you can just submit through the form, or you can just use the contact form if you're not sure how to go about it, which category would be best for you to join. It's often the case that somebody who's an individual editor, they may also actually have a membership through their journal or publisher. Yeah. So you can kind of check that with COPE as well. They'll be able to tell you what the best approach for that is. Yeah. And the benefit is that you get to attend the forums and attend member-only kind of seminars, and so
audit.
Yeah, there's the COPE audit.
Letters.
There's the e-learning, which only part of that is available for free online to people who aren't members. Yeah, so there's a lot of material that is not free on the website.
I think we might have to wrap up.
Are you considering some group membership in the country, like we have in East?
Oh, like
a group of individual members
chapters
of the same, yeah.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, we haven't. That hasn't been discussed, but
no.
Yeah.
I also ask because we're currently working on we're currently in Ukraine working on changes of the regulations and the regulations from on the national level. So we discovered that it's right now paid membership. When we submitted our application, it was free of charge. So I voted and I said it's free of charge, but right now it's not. It's not true. So are you going to consider some exceptions from?
So we have waivers. Yeah.
Not waivers, but free of charge membership for instance, because you're a very important organization. Your recommendations are very famous and recognized. So, for instance, for national communities, National Association of Editors, I don't know, ministries from different countries, because it's very important to create a bridge between this organization and national ministries, especially in countries who are on the way of introducing these rules. It would be very helpful.
Yeah. With the question of kind of waivers and which groups are relevant. So we were the co-chairs of the membership subcommittee, but we've stepped down from that position. I stepped down because it conflicted with my role as head of editorial at DOAJ. I didn't want to have that much power over journals. But what we can do definitely is if you just send us an email, then we'll be able to pass it on to the trustees to be able to discuss the right approach for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up now. We're running on, and yeah, people want to get to their next things. So thank you very much, everybody online for joining. If you have any particular questions, then you can follow up by email, and we may be able to answer to them. So I think we will say thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Thanks.
Enjoy also.
Thank you.